armed rebel group
The RSF forces seized the Zamzam camp, killing
hunger towards the foreigners, and many, they say, are inside.
Typical and negative media representation of Africa not only disinforms the rest of the world about our continent, but also shapes the way we see ourselves as Africans. And shaping our own narratives must be our top priority. In this regard, I would like to propose the establishment of an African media house.
This is Pulse of Africa, the face and voice of Africa. The story of resurgent and burgeoning Africa is here, only on the Pulse of Africa channel. Pulse of Africa, the face and voice of Africa.
Ethiopian Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed launched Pulse of Africa POA, a platform aimed at transforming the global perception of Africa and fostering a sense of pride among Africans themselves.
Pulse of Africa. Pulse of Africa. Pulse of Africa.
Today, we gather to mark the beginning of a new era, one that promotes genuine stories, cultural diversity, innovation, and solidarity across the continent. We are excited to have you join us as we introduce POA's mission to showcase Africa's strength, ingenuity, and remarkable potential.
Located in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, Pulse of Africa POA is more than simply a platform. It's a movement committed to reshaping the international narrative about Africa. Through sharing in-depth, genuine stories, honoring cultural diversity, and emphasizing advancement and innovation, POA seeks to challenge stereotypes and correct misconceptions.
In this spirit, Pulse of Africa echoes Ethiopian Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed's statement at the 35th Ordinary Session of the AU Assembly, emphasizing the importance of ensuring Africa's voice is heard loudly and clearly on the global stage.
Its importance resides in empowering Africans, fostering pride and cultivating a more truthful, respectful and inspiring perception of the continent globally. Pulse of Africa's goal is to showcase genuine stories, honor cultural diversity, encourage innovation and promote unity to reshape perceptions and inspire pride and development across Africa.
Pulse of Africa.
Influential individuals from Ethiopia and internationally have previously spoken about the potential impact of POA in transforming the global narrative about Africa. In his congratulatory message at the inauguration ceremony of Pulse of Africa today, Ethiopian Prime Minister once again reiterated his previous message about the primary objective of the media house: to change the narrative about Africa and propel it into a better frontier through authentic storytelling and raising awareness.
Hopefully, this message will be shared by all Africans and leaders across the continent, as the media offers a solution to the long overdue challenge of negative portrayals that shape self and global perceptions. Once again, we would like to congratulate the people of Africa and the African diaspora, as well as those who are true friends of the continent and who, in some ways, feel part of the great journey of shaping the African narrative.
This is Africa, the cradle of humanity, the frontier of the future, a land of visionaries, creators and pioneers, a continent of unstoppable energy where innovation meets tradition, where voices rise, loud and fearless.
I am an African.
This is the heartbeat of a billion people, diverse, bold, united by a single purpose to tell our own stories in our own way. No borders, no barriers, no filters. A new era of African storytelling is here. From every corner of the continent, from the bustling cities to the quiet village, we tell Africa's story by Africans for the world. This is the land of a rising Africa, where Africa speaks and the world listens. This is why today we bring you POA, Pulse of Africa, the face and voice of Africa.
On this historic day, Pulse of Africa proudly presents a special edition of our news coverage dedicated to the inauguration of Pulse of Africa itself. Congratulations once again and stay tuned. Ethiopian Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed has officially inaugurated Pulse of Africa Media. Based in Ethiopia, Pulse of Africa is a pan-African media platform envisioned to serve as the face and voice of Africa. The platform is designed to challenge and correct long-standing misconceptions and misrepresentations about Africa, offering a more authentic narrative to the world. Numerous African leaders, including Ethiopian Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed, have consistently championed the creation of a pan-African media outlet to amplify African perspectives. Notably, Dr. Abiy Ahmed emphasized the urgent need for such a platform during his address at the 35th Ordinary Session of the African Union. Established at the headquarters of the African Union in Addis Ababa, the media house operates from a state-of-the-art complex where it will broadcast nuanced African stories in both English and Arabic.
U.S. Ambassador to Ethiopia, Irvin Masinga, hailed Pulse of Africa for its tangible strides toward becoming a leading pan-African media powerhouse. The ambassador recently paid an official visit to the headquarters of Pulse of Africa, a rising media institution committed to becoming a leading pan-African voice in journalism, storytelling, and public discourse. During his visit, the ambassador was given a comprehensive tour of the organization's ongoing reforms and infrastructure development. POA leadership showcased their strategic efforts to build a robust media ecosystem that reflects Africa's diversity, aspirations, and global relevance. These reforms are part of POA's broader mission to establish itself as the premier Pan-African media institution. One of the highlights of the visit was Ambassador Masinga's tour of POA's state-of-the-art media studio. The ambassador was visibly impressed by the studio's design, functionality, and potential to amplify African narratives on a global scale. In an exclusive interview with Pulse of Africa following the tour, Ambassador Masinga shared his admiration for the organization's vision and progress.
Its ambitions for expanding its coverage internationally in the region and even beyond, and the quality of the journalism is very impressive. And I'm also incredibly impressed by the fact that you have such ambitions to take your engagement to the higher level.
POA, the Pulse of Africa.
I would like you to follow POA, the voice of Africa.
This is the face and the voice of Africa. We want you to watch this all the time.
The voice of Africa. Stick with it. You will see Africa, how it will change for the better.
United Democratic Alliance UDA backs Ethiopia's new Pan-African media. Nicodemus Bor, Executive Director of Kenya's United Democratic Alliance UDA party, has held the Pulse of Africa, a groundbreaking Pan-African media initiative launched by Ethiopia, as a vital force for reshaping the continent's story and authentically portraying its people and realities. Leading a Kenyan delegation, Bor toured the Pulse of Africa's cutting-edge media facility in Addis Ababa. Impressed by the setup, he voiced strong optimism that the outlet will transform the prevailing negative portrayal of Africa, which have long dominated global discourse. He described the creation of the dedicated African media platform as a much-needed step, with the Pulse of Africa serving as an exemplary solution.
In this state of the world where wrong information is propagated across the country, we expect Pulse of Africa to be the truth that people will look at and expect the right information, not propaganda and other information that are detrimental to the development and peace and unity of our Africa.
The Ethiopian government reaffirmed its commitment to Pulse of Africa's vision. Ethiopian Deputy Prime Minister Temesgen Turuna has reaffirmed the government's commitment to supporting Pulse of Africa in its mission to be the voice and face of Africa. The Deputy Prime Minister emphasized Ethiopia's historic identity as a nation of freedom that was never colonized. Building on this legacy, he stressed that Ethiopia must also take lead in the media sector through Pulse of Africa to champion African agendas through African media. Through the Pulse of Africa initiative, we must project the continent's true narrative with confidence and unity, he said. He is confident that Pulse of Africa will be a platform where Africans can tell their own stories in their own words. The government will fully support this vision, he reaffirmed.
Pulse of Africa የሚል
You are working with a platform called Pulse of Africa. Ethiopia has been a pioneer in many aspects. It has never been colonized. Moreover, Ethiopia has played a vital role in supporting African movements for independence. As part of our commitment to advancing media independence, we will continue to support platforms like this.
A land of wealth, a future of limitless possibilities. This is El Dorado. From natural rich to groundbreaking innovations, discover Africa's untapped potential.
Africa remains the world's second fastest growing region after Asia. East Africa, with real GDP growth rising from an estimated 1.5% in 2023 to 5.7% in 2025. Growth is projected to pick up in West Africa, in North Africa, growth is projected to decline from an estimated 4.1% in 2023 to 3.6% in 2024 and 4.2% in 2025. Growth in Southern Africa, growth in Central Africa, average growth in oil-exporting countries, Africa's economic performance is showing signs of improvement, according to the 2025 Macroeconomic Performance and Outlook.
El Dorado, unveiling Africa's global potential.
Adam Farah, Vice President of Ethiopia's ruling Prosperity Party and head of the Democratic System Building Center, commends Pulse of Africa's Pan-African media vision. Adam Farah visited the headquarters of Pulse of Africa, POA, accompanied by a delegation of high-ranking government officials. Adam Farah's visit underscored the growing continental significance of POA's emergence as a Pan-African media institution. During the tour of POA's newly constructed facilities, Adam Farah was briefed on the organization's strategic initiatives, including investment in cutting-edge media infrastructure, professional development programs, and digital innovation. Following his tour of the media infrastructure, including studios, training centers, and broadcast facilities, Adam Farah delivered a speech to POA's management and staff. He encouraged them to continue their efforts in building a media institution that reflects Africa's unity, resilience, and aspirations.
I encouraged the organization to sustain its commendable efforts. I was pleased to visit and observe its remarkable progress firsthand. I strongly believe this media platform will elevate diverse voices on the global stage. As it advances toward becoming a world-class media institution, we remain committed to providing the necessary support.
For POA and for Africa as a whole, it is our time. It is our time, and the media must play a crucial role because you are the fourth estate. Everywhere in the world that you go, the media is the one that advocates good. And that is what we believe POA and other media bodies across the continent should network together. In this modern world, we are a global village. What footage is taken in Zambia, what interview is done in Zambia can be shared here in Ethiopia, can be shared in Accra, can be shared across our continent. Let us truly advocate, as you've said, in the spirit of Pan-Africanism, that we are one. And once we take that approach as a continent, we remove restrictions, for instance, of travel, remove visa requirements amongst ourselves. We will see a more progressive Africa. We will see us move together in a transition that the world would marvel at, in my view.
Director General of the National Intelligence and Security Service, Redwan Hussein, praised the launch of Pulse of Africa. He described the move as a timely and strategic initiative. He emphasized that Ethiopian media has traditionally concentrated on local and national issues, with limited engagement in broader continental narratives. In this context, Pulse of Africa represents a significant shift, offering a dedicated platform to spotlight African affairs and foster Pan-African dialogue. Redwan highlighted Ethiopia's historic contributions to the liberation and independence of numerous African nations, noting the country's long-standing commitment to the ideals of African unity. He affirmed that Ethiopia has consistently positioned itself as a leading advocate for continental solidarity and cooperation. He further underscored the transformative potential of Pulse of Africa in amplifying Ethiopia's role within the African media landscape.
Until now, most of our media outlets have focused primarily on local and national issues. While there have been a few attempts to cover broader African topics, these efforts have largely remained confined within the scope of our national concerns. At the headquarters of Africa, and in light of the role we aspire to play across the continent, expanding the reach of our media to reflect this vision is great.
Getachew Reda, Prime Minister's advisor on East African affairs, has praised the establishment of Pulse of Africa. Getachew praised it as a bold and visionary initiative. Following his visit to the platform, he expressed appreciation for its innovative approach and the ambition it represents for African media. He noted that Pulse of Africa has introduced not only new program formats, but also transformative content that reflects a forward-looking aspiration for the continent's development. According to Getachew, such efforts are essential in reshaping Africa's narrative and presenting its stories with greater depth and authenticity. He emphasized the importance of reporting nuanced African stories, stating that this approach plays a critical role in changing outdated perceptions and promoting a more accurate and empowering image of the continent. He commended Pulse of Africa for embracing this nuanced vision, highlighting its potential to influence discourse and foster unity across Africa.
By introducing a more nuanced concept, this initiative marks a significant step forward. It has not only reformed its presentation, but also transformed its content and expanded its accessibility. I believe it's commendable.
I think it's an important media initiative. Ethiopia is the beacon of both civilization and African independence. And I think it is befitting that you intend to create a media organization that represents Africa in many ways, because Ethiopia, historically speaking, is the first nation that brought African countries together, relating this to the African Union. So this is the first nation that brought all African nations together with the unity of purpose to fight colonialism and to ensure that all African nations are independent. That is an important historical departure, both for Ethiopia and for Africans. And I think it is really befitting that you intend to express and narrate the stories of Africa from Addis Ababa, from the center of Africa.
I believe that's a very nice initiative because as Africans we have been having so many messages portrayed by other different countries, and I believe a first-hand expression of how we've been growing, how we've been changing in the past few decades will actually connect us to the other or to the rest of the world. So I actually encourage it, and I would encourage other people to watch it as well.
Pulse of Africa.
That concludes our news bulletin from Pulse of Africa. Thank you for joining us. Stay connected with our latest updates, programs, and documentaries by following Pulse of Africa across all major social media platforms.
They shaped history. They inspired generations. They are the notables.
I think of voices I have lost. The pledge unspoken, the more than acts of faith that forge an instant world in silent pact with strangers.
We consider ourselves the spokesmen for the underprivileged peoples of the world.
This week, we honor Wole Soyinka, a legend who left his mark.
Today marks the official inauguration of Pulse of Africa, a pan-African media platform committed to amplifying the voices and stories of the continent. As part of its momentous occasion, we now present a special roundup segment highlighting key moments and celebrations surrounding the launch of the Pulse of Africa.
Pulse
Pulse of Africa aims to challenge stereotypes and promote a positive image of Africa through storytelling, cultural exchange and advocacy. Launched today by Ethiopian Prime Minister, His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed, it highlights the continent's diversity and potential to foster unity and pride. I'm your host, Edom Masai, joined by my colleagues, Barakat Sisai, Gamachisa Mandida and Zelalem Ibeldan. Stay with us. Barakat, Gamachisa and Zelalem, welcome to Pulse of Africa.
Thank you.
So today we have inaugurated Pulse of Africa, the Pan-African media. What are the feels of this vibe?
Thank you very much, Edom. It is a very historic day. It's a very great day. We have launched a continental media by the Ethiopian Prime Minister. Actually, the Prime Minister is actually one of the person in terms of initiating this big idea. And then it has a lot of positive impacts, not only for the continent, but also Ethiopia as well. If you look at from Ethiopian perspective, as we know that Ethiopia has always been on the right side of history when it comes to promoting, advancing African cause. You know, if you remember, like in the early 20th century, when Pan-Africanism was established and when it was actually, getting some traction in the minds of Africans, in the minds of black people, Ethiopia played a very prominent role. For example, if you look at the Battle of Adwa, the victory actually emboldened many black people to start fight against domination and subjugation. And then after, Ethiopia also played a very important role when it comes to helping African nations when they were under domination, when they were actually under subjugation. Ethiopia helped these African countries through technical support, through psychological support to fight against colonization and helping them to get rid of this yoke of colonization from their shoulder. And even recently, Ethiopia has been a good supporter of African brotherly nations and African peoples. This is because Ethiopia actually played by the very principle of collective security. For example, in recent time, Ethiopia has been dispatching its soldiers to many African countries. It contributed for the maintenance of peace and security in different parts of the continent. So even one thing that I didn't mention is that, for example, Ethiopia also the birthplace of the African unity. We remember how the Emperor Haile Selassie played during the creation of the African Union, and the emperor, by his capacity, also played a very important role in terms of just narrowing the gap between the Casablanca and the Monrovia group in terms of just creating a Pan-African institutions. That's why the headquarters of the African Union decided to be here in the capital of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. So if you look at Ethiopia's contribution to Africa has always been on the same, This Pan-African media, which was launched by Ethiopian Prime Minister today, is one of the great success that actually sustain Ethiopia's historic contribution to African unity, African solidarity. So I would say that this is, one of the great things that Ethiopia has achieved in this time. So I would like to congratulate not only Ethiopians but also Africans at large.
Thank you very much, Barakat. Moving on to you, Gamachisa.
Yes, Edom. The launch of POA is significant and it is timely, I would say. The reason is that, of course, as Barakat said, Africa needs such a media that highlights its importance, its significance in the world stage. Well, we have, stereotypes that have been killing, Africa's image, we can say. And the people in Africa have been misrepresented by other medias globally. And just people in the rest of the world, just have a wrong impression of Africans in general. And Africans are seen as incapable, feeble in many ways. And we have to say, just that's not the case totally. And of course, Africa has, stories that highlight its significance, its creativity, its innovation over the history in the past centuries, in the past decades, we can say. And even, before, say, Europeans, just happened to come to the African continent, Africa had its own history, its own civilization. And that has been, shaped negatively by other media globally, and Africa's voices have been, undermined for quite too long. And so Of course, Africa could have, challenges economically, politically, socially, in many ways, as the case is, elsewhere. But if we take a look at, the global media, we see that the representation they have about Africa is quite wrong. And they, we can say most of the time, focus on, just the negative aspect of, reality in the African continent. And African leaders, have realized the need to have, just a media that portrays, the importance of the culture, the economic activities, the political activities in the African continent. And so because of this, it is very important that, we have such a media that focuses on the good side of Africa as well. And we can say Africa can showcase, its beautiful culture, its beautiful norms, its wonderful activities in all aspects of life. And for that, there must be, a narrator of African stories, African histories. And I believe that, just Pulse of Africa is just the one that can do all these good things about the African people or the people in the African continent in general.
Thank you, Gamachisa. You've highlighted how much this new launch could be a bridge to the misinterpretation and misrepresentation that has happened in the past, and how we can portray our culture. Moving on to you, Zelalem, how are you enthusiastic about this new launch, and how are you feeling?
Quite enthusiastic, and thank you very much, Edom. So today we have just successfully inaugurated and launched a Pan-African media institution called Pulse of Africa, POA. So Pulse of Africa is based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, the headquarters of the Continental Organization African Union. So it's going to disseminate information, news, documentaries, programs from Addis Ababa, and Pulse of Africa will portray the right image of Africa. As we rightly said, the image of Africa has been misinterpreted and misrepresented by so many international media and by different platforms. So it's great that we have launched Pulse of Africa, POA, so the major objective of which is to change the narratives of Africa. The narratives of Africa. Narrative is such an important concept, isn't it? Narratives. Narratives impact people at an individual level. Narratives impact country. Narratives impact continents like Africa. And narratives could have a significant impact at the global stage as well. So I am the product of narrative. You are the product of the narrative. And we all are the product of narratives. So narrative is such a big thing, such a powerful thing. So I think it's pretty much important to spend time talking about the narratives. Yeah, what I'm trying to say is Africa's today is very much associated and related with the narratives that have been developed. For instance, when we were a child, what kind of stories, what kind of narratives that we used to listen, we used to watch, we used to read when we were a child. For instance, when I was a child, of course, all of you might share such feeling. We heard that African leaders are incapable. When we were a child, we were taught that African leaders are corrupt, African leaders are dictators. Yes, there is no doubt that there are African leaders who might not be responsible. There might be African leaders who might be reckless about their society, about their country. But all African leaders could never be the same. All African leaders could not be dictators, could not be corrupt, could not be irresponsible about their society. But we have been told that African leaders are reckless. African leaders do not worry about their society. African leaders are incapable of changing their society, changing their nations, changing their continent. So we have been told this narrative. We have also been told that Africans couldn't utilize their natural resources, their natural endowments to propel economic growth and to bring about the desired change that the people of Africa are trusted, are hungered of, are starved of. So we have been told about such kind of narratives. So the thing is, the narratives impact how we think about our potential. It limits our potential. There is a saying that goes like, you can go beyond what others think of you, but you can never go beyond what you think of yourself. Let me repeat this super important concept. you can go beyond what others think of you, but you can never go beyond what you think of yourself. The understanding of yourself is very much important. Africa needs to understand itself. Africa needs to understand its potential. Africa needs to acknowledge its resource. Africa needs to believe in the power of Africans, in the power of their leaders. Africans need to believe in themselves. For example, Edom, if you think like, if I think like Edom cannot present this program well, you can definitely, absolutely present the program in a well-organized manner. But if you yourself think like, I cannot present this program well, you will never present this program. So it depends on how we think. It all starts from the narratives and it all starts from the thinking. So the major battle takes place in our mind, in the narratives. So we need to change the narratives. We need to shape and reshape the narratives of Africa. So it's great that today we have successfully launched and unveiled Pulse of Africa. So Pulse of Africa will definitely contribute for shaping and reshaping the narratives of Africa. And I want to say congratulations to Africans and peoples of Africa, friends of Africans as well.
Thank you.
Edom, excuse me. When Zelalem speaks of just the need, to come together, I mean, the need for having, a positive attitude towards what we can do. I'm just reminded of the term efficacy. And efficacy is a term that stands for what you think you can do. Okay? It's all about, what you think of your performance. So if you say, I can do this, and when you try to do it, the success rate is very high. But if you believe just in your mind that, you can't do it, and then even though you might have, the capability, anything that you need, it is very likely that you fail. Of course, I've read, research about efficacy. Efficacy is so important before we engage in anything that we do. Well, generally speaking, the outside world, I mean, the media outside of Africa have always been telling us that, Africans are incapable. Africans are savages, Africans are backward, and they just come over and then, just pick images, or they have, media productions that focus on what we lack, anything that we do wrong. For example, conflict is, one thing. So here and there, for instance, on external media that are external to the African continent, they show when Africans fight one another, when there is too much drought, when people die of drought, famine, etc., and poverty here and there. Well, what they say is all this is happening because, Africans are incapable, and we can do it, is, what our media should portray in general. So this positive message in African media should be emphasized, and Pulse of Africa is just the one that can do it. So we need to have, high efficacy, okay? When we engage in development activities, when we engage in any economic activities, in terms of our cultural heritages, I mean, in terms of protecting our cultural heritages, and in terms of utilizing our cultural elements, norms, there are good things in our culture that we can harness, we can utilize for our own good. Pulse of Africa as a continental media, I think, should come up with, this motto, yes, we can. And so it has to show that, Africans really can do, which means, African citizens, wherever they are, both in the continent and outside of it, need to have, a strengthened, a heightened efficacy regarding, just what they can do. So we have, negative realities in the African continent. Well, we can't deny them because, just we see them, we watch them. But we also have, great things, positive things. And especially in recent decades, African leaders have proven to be, good leaders, okay? not all of them, but most of them. We have, just great leaders that have brought development in their countries, in their respective countries, that have opened, new doors for their citizens. And Pulse of Africa, as a continental media, I hope, as of now, is going to exhibit, just what Africans can do together. Yeah. So it is really a necessary and a timely continental media, I would say.
So you've mentioned that we've been traditionally portrayed in different contexts. So I would like you to say something regarding the lasting effects and how the pillars of the Pulse of Africa, our missions and objectives, are further reinforcing Africa as a continent and as a stage as well.
Before I respond to your question of like how Pulse of Africa is going to, make an impact in terms of changing the negative narrative about Africa, I think it's better to look at, the origin of this negative narrative about Africa. I think, from my perspective, I think it's very much linked to the colonial legacy. Most of the problems or the predicament that we have been facing by now, specifically in Africa, either you mentioned in the economic sector, in the social and the political sector, which is very much linked with the colonial legacy, because it has a lasting impact on the social, economic and political structure of African people, So one of this impact is on the perception of Africans about themselves and on the perception of the international community about Africa, which is negative, They just, when colonization was brought to Africa, they want to, justify their activity by saying that Africa is a dark continent, an exotic one, which is inhibited by uncivilized society, those savage people actually living here. And this justification has a profound impact, has left a profound impact on, the life after colonization. Of course, it has been like almost after 70 or 60 years since we have, avoided or, get rid of colonization from the continent. But its negative impact still resonates. It's felt in many ways. And one of the main reasons is that. And the second one is, as we know that, like most of the times, when you look at the headlines, the international media outlets, you see that Africa has been presented as Gamachis and Zalalam trying to mention that Africa as presented as a continent where poverty is grinds on, where political instability actually happens, or democratic crisis is actually pervasive, or maybe corruption, or you can mention like other equally compelling negative things is actually being presented by the international media outlets, specifically the Western one. And one of the reasons why they did this one is because most of the time the positive story doesn't sell that much, or you don't have that much traction when it comes to the international media landscapes. Whenever you portray Africa like positively, they're not just actually getting like a positive response, or they don't get as much audience as they want, so that's why they want to focus on the negative one. Of course, we have a biological trait, we have a biological orientation to focus on a negative one rather than the positive one. That's also one of the keys. But the media owners, the media practitioner has also the tendency to focus on some of the negative things when it comes to African issue. So this also the other main reason why Africa is actually being presented negatively. And the third one is, most of the times African stories are actually being told by others than Africans, So we haven't seen any fidelity when it comes to the story, the element of the story by itself, So we don't have that much authenticity when it comes to the African story, since it has been told by others. So they don't have that much, clear information about the issue that they are actually reporting or writing about, As we know, like as a journalist, we know that how the international media actually operating, they have this tradition of the safari tradition, if there is something pop up in Africa, for example, if there is some post-election crisis or some calamities when related to the climate change, something like this one, they just come and they go back, so they don't have any prior knowledge about that issue. So that actually, create a kind of ill-informed community when they release that news to the international media, to even for the African as well. So this also the other main problem. And the fourth one is going to be, there are some groups I would say that, or some actors who really want to, maintain Africa to be presented as negatively. They have some interest. For example, during the colonization, they have the interest to exploit Africa, and they want to, brought what Africa has to their place and to utilize for their good, for their interest. Just like that, nowadays, there are also some groups who really want to maintain their interest while maintaining Africa depicted as negatively. And I think the other one is ignorance and distance by itself. For example, we most of the time we described as a homogenic entity. We treat it as as a monolithic entity, but Africa is a continent with diverse nations. We have different language, we have different experience, we have different cultures, we have different economic developmental stage, but we treat it as one. Specifically whenever there is some some negative things happen in Africa, they really want us to be depicted in that way. Sometimes it's really puzzling why they hell bent on discrediting us. So when it comes to its impact, it's a lot. If you give me time, I would go by one. Maybe like if you look at the economic aspects. The first one is for example, if you look at investment, the foreign direct investment, investment is all about perception. When you have a negative perception, you didn't come to Africa and then invest your money. So just like this, many investors, whenever they encounter such a kind of negative media portrayals, they start to think about Africa as risky and a stable one. So investment is very it's a risky business. So if they see like a perceived trait when they come to Africa, they don't really want to come to Africa or any other part of the continent. So this is one of the impact of the wrong perception by the media. So investments would undermine in Africa. And the second one is aid dependency description. So whenever the constant portrayal of Africa as a poor continent, as a people where they are actually facing some sort of plight, some sort of suffering, they think that Africa always needs some sort of charity. So that kind of the genuine partnership is very much important. So they get rid of such a kind of partnership with Africa. So they stick to the aid and dependency kind of relationship with Africa. And the other impact is on the tourism sector. We have like many abundant natural resources. We have cultural sites, we have historical sites, we have religious sites, and we have like enormous tourism potentials. Because of this negative portrayals, those who are actually able to come to Africa and visit, wouldn't be able to come. So this is one of the impact of the negative portrayal of the media. And the other one is when it comes to the politics. As we know that, when you have a bad reputation, you wouldn't have, the strong political power at the international level. That's why many African nations, even as a continent, we don't have that much political power at the international level. So this is also one of the impact of the wrong perception by the media. And the other one is, for example, if you look at, most of the times Africa has been neglected by the international politics. For example, many African leaders, including Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, repeatedly called for the reform of the international financial institution, reform of the United Nations, because they haven't put our voice at the center of their decision-making process. And one of the reasons why we haven't have that privilege is the fact that we are actually presented negatively. And we have lost that opportunity because of the perception people have about us, and even we have about ourselves. So this has also some of the impacts by the negative portrayal of Africa so far. So this is one of the impacts. Maybe if I can add one, maybe like psychological impact by itself. The perception not only shape. The negative portrayal not only shape the international community, idea about Africa, it also shape our perception about ourselves. So it also negatively impacted our self-esteem. So our self-esteem, our confidence would be badly impacted by the negative portrayals. And even for example, when you come to the culture, the arts, the music, you know, most of the times, for example, the Western culture, the Western arts considered to be the standard. But when you look at the African culture, the African music, they usually treated as the tribalist one, you know, the ethnic one, it's the backward one, you know. This is also one of the impact of the negative portrayal by the international media outlets, and it has to be changed. And Pulse of Africa, I'm sure it will do some positive impact on this one.
Yeah.
You've highlighted the economic, political, as well as psychological impact of false narratives. So before we move on to the next responder, we'll be back after a short break.
Pulse of Africa is now live.
Let us voyage together to Algeria and its beautiful melodies. Rhyme music is a prominent genre in Algerian music.
Moving on to you, what would you like to add to this statement by our colleague Barakat?
Yes, well, I could see that, of course, Barakat explained very well just the negative impacts of, say, Western media in general regarding, you know, just Africa's image in all aspects, economic, social, political. And of course, they could have, you know, their own reasons, you know, to do that. The reason is that they just want to make use of what Africa has in general. For instance, if Africa is portrayed as a continent that does not advance in technology, and then maybe entrepreneurs might not be coming to the continent and invest. And then this means that, you know, Africans will have only, you know, just the rich raw materials, which of course, you know, nations external to the African continent need badly. The advanced world in general, they have, you know, technology, they have finance, and what they need from the African continent is, of course, raw material. And we can see that these nations, you know, want Africa to remain where it is. Unless and otherwise, you know, Africans stand for themselves, by themselves, and then take, you know, just the journey for advancement and for development. So the media play, you know, peculiar roles in keeping, you know, Africans where they are, which is, you know, just backward, traditional, unable to utilize technology for making use of, you know, just their untapped natural resources. When it comes to, you know, Pulse of Africa is expected to propagate, okay, to showcase, you know, what countries, including Ethiopia and other countries, are doing in terms of, you know, bringing about, you know, investments in the continent. Pulse of Africa need to propagate, you know, all these success stories that have been, you know, achieved by all African nations.
Moving on to you,
all right.
What would you like to add to these views which were pre-stated by our colleagues.
Yeah, today we are actually on the historic day. We have successfully unveiled a Pan-African media institution called the Pulse of Africa. So we are in a great deal of excitement today. The Pulse of Africa, the major objective behind this Pan-African media institution is apparently to voice the voice of Africa and to change the narratives of Africa. As we have said earlier, the narratives do have a significant impact in how we perceive our world, in how we perceive our environment, how we perceive ourselves. So the Pulse of Africa will change the narratives of Africa. So we said like the narratives of Africa are biased, stereotypical and inaccurate as well. So the major problem here is who owns the narratives of Africa? Where the narratives of Africa emerged from? Where the narratives of Africa emanated from? That is the big problem. The problem is the narratives of Africa are not owned by Africans. Africans are not the owners of the narratives, their narratives. That's the real problem. The narratives of Africa, in fact, comes from non-Africans, and largely the narratives of Africa are shaped by Westerners. And the Westerners' narratives of Africa are found to be biased, inaccurate, stereotypical, and incomplete as well. So that is the big problem. So there is a saying that goes like, until the lion speaks about itself, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. The narratives of Africa will always downplay the achievements of Africa and glorify the achievements of colonizers and those who abuse Africa. Africa needs to be the owners of its own narratives, and why the Pulse of Africa is established today. There are so many problems related with the narratives of Africa. And firstly, as my colleague Barakat interestingly elaborated, the first problem of narrative with regards to Africa is the narrative that view Africa as monolithic, as a single entity, as one country. If you see, for example, foreigners outside of the continent, from America, from Europe, or from the other continents of the planet, when they come to African countries, for instance, when they travel to Morocco, or when they travel to Somalia, when they travel to Zimbabwe, Ghana, they say like, I'm traveling to Africa. They don't specifically mention that specific country they are marching to. They say, I am going to Africa. Why? Because Africa is portrayed and perceived as one single entity. That's the major problem. And that disregard the diversity of Africa. Africa is such a diverse continent. That's fact. Historically, geographically, traditionally, culturally, linguistic-wise, Africa is such a diverse continent. For example, if you see the history of Africa, you know, Africa is a continent where big empires, big kingdoms, big civilizations emerge and prosper. For instance, you see the civilization in the northeastern part of the continent, the Nubia kingdom, the Nubia empire, the Nubia civilization, the present-day Sudan, in Nubia with the trading center, the learning center in the ancient time. And the Timbuktu, the present-day Mali, was, of course, the center of commerce in the medieval period. And here in the Eastern Africa, there is a kingdom of Aksum, the present-day Ethiopia. So African history is such diverse, but African history is reduced to the history of slavery and colonialism, and it disregards the huge histories of Africa, the huge civilizations of Africa, the achievements of Africa, the contributions of Africa to the world. So that's the first problem. Geographically, Africa is also diverse. You see, Africa is home to Sahara Desert, the largest desert in the entire world. And equally, Africa is also the place that hosts the tropical rainforest, the Congo tropical rainforest, which is the second largest rainforest in the entire world. Africa also encompasses rivers, lakes, mountains, streams, and other natural endowments. But these treasures of Africa, these resources of Africa are disregarded and perceived as a monolithic and single entity. Linguistically, culturally, Africa is diverse. Africa is regarded as, Africa is considered as a mosaic of culture because there are like more than 3,000 ethnic groups in Africa, 2,000 languages, more than 2,000 languages spoken in Africa. But these diversities are undermined and downplayed by the narratives of the West,
that perceives Africa as a single entity. This is the first problem with regard to the narratives on Africa. The other is Africa is also considered and perceived as a dark continent. You know, the narrative see Africa as a continent endowed with natural resource, no problem with that. But the narrative also see like Africans cannot utilize their own natural resource unless Africans are helped by foreigners, unless Africans are helped by outside forces. Africa cannot utilize their own natural resource. Africa cannot utilize their gold, their cobalt, their diamond, and you name it. There are enormous natural resources in the continent. So Africans couldn't utilize their own natural resource. That is the other narrative. This is very dangerous narrative. And of course, this is the narrative that exposed Africa to unprecedented grave injustice, to the injustice of slavery, colonialism. What does that mean? Africa cannot utilize their own natural resource unless helped by others. So it's inviting others to come to Africa and to utilize, to explore, to exploit African resources. In fact, that is the narrative that brings European colonizers to the African soil. So when we say like we need to change African narratives, that's not for we are interested in the beautiful words about Africa, because the narratives of Africa do have significant impact, grave negative impact for the people of Africa. The narratives toward Africa are also incomplete. You know, like I said before, the narratives are reduced to slavery history. I mean, slavery and colonialism and the rest of Africa's history. Africa's achievement in terms of philosophy, Africa's achievement in terms of wisdom are downplayed and disregarded by those dominant, entrenched narratives, narratives that are shaped by non-Africans, dominantly Westerners. So the pulse of Africa, which is based in Ethiopia, is expected to shape and reshape the narratives of Africa. And we're going to bring fresh perspectives and insights from four corners of the continent, north to south, west to east, and of course from central part of Africa. We need to be the owner of our own narratives.
Your response significantly presupposes upon the dependency theory, where we've been treated as peripheries by the core states. And you've also mentioned how African philosophy has tried to counteract these narratives. One philosopher we could mention from here, from Ethiopia, is Emperor Zera Yacob, where he wrote the Hatata, which further incorporates inquiry into different beliefs. So we could also mention the famous author Mafiji, where from the Western Africa, he tried to counteract these narratives and back up African ideologies and stances. So we've mentioned these narratives have been not milestones for us, but significant hurdles in the process, which makes us move to the next question. Media shift. So in what ways can African media shift its focus to counteract these negative stereotypes and promote a more balanced narrative about Africa?
I mean, just to respond to your question, I think it's better to look at, I mean, the very reason why the Pulse of Africa is actually initiated. I mean, as Zelalem and Gemach is trying to mention about the Pulse of Africa, as you have already mentioned about, you know, if you put Africa on a continent, you know, you would put Africa on the periphery. You know, the core states are like those who have already developed in the Western country. And when it comes to the media landscape as well, Africa has been taking like a periphery or a marginalized position. And Pulse of Africa is actually initiated to reposition the African stance at the international political landscape, at the same time the media landscape. And its prime objective is to change the narrative and challenge the stereotype which go against the very interest of African people and African nations. And the second objective of the Pulse of Africa is going to be, I mean, reliable platforms whereby African stories are going to be told by Africans. You know, as we have already discussed about, as Zelalem mentioned, the African story have been, or for long been told by non-Africans. You know, now the Pulse of Africa has been already created, and it's already just opened its door for Africans to tell their own stories to themselves, at the same time for the international world as well. And the Pulse of Africa is actually driven by the ideals of Pan-Africanism. It's aspired to, create a kind of solidarity, a kind of collaboration among African nations, African peoples, at the same time African institutions as well. So it's so to see a strong Pan-African bondage among African nations, because collaboration is very important, as a country, what we have, maybe our neighbors do not have, So the only possible way that we can have everything is through genuine collaboration and genuine cooperation. And Pulse of Africa will work for realizing of this, golden goals. And if you look at the Pulse of Africa, we have different programs. Just to introduce, like we have a news bulletin, and at the same time breaking news, which updates the real-time updates on the African realities. At the same time, we have also a news or a main news package, which updates about the current affairs of African social, political, and economic phenomena. And at the same time, we have also different programs. For example, we have the Africa We Want, and that programs we promote the African Progress Aspiration, which is very much aligned with the Agenda 2063, which is the blueprint of the African Unions. That is our aspiration, our shared goals. And if you look at the other programs, for example, we have the Creators, which try to showcase African potentials, and then the youth potentials. We have different startups, different kind of investment opportunities in the African continents. We can actually sustain the development that we have seen for the last 2 decades, as Gamach is trying to mention earlier. Development is peaking in Africa. Most of the emerging and frontier market is in Africa. This is some of the positive stories. So in our programs, we try to showcase this success stories, this achievement, this advancement, And we have also the notable programs, which celebrates the African pioneers, African talented individuals, icons, just to inspire our audience, and then to create a kind of, embolden the youth to make the same kind of, positive things to their country, at the same time their continent. And then we have also other programs like the Horse Mouse. In that programs we tend to listen some of the expert comments about the progress that we have been making, the challenge, different kind of things like that. So when you look at the Pulse of Africa, it has brought about different kind of package whereby Africans tell their stories to themselves, to the international world as well, because our image for many times or for long been dented by the international media outlets, specifically the Western ones. And I'm not just blaming, but this is the reality. And Pulse of Africa here is to, change that narration for once and all. Just to sum up my point, what's peculiar about Pulse of Africa? I think the first one is authenticity. As I already mentioned about authenticity, it's all about, whenever we report about something, there has to be some fidelity about the report, or the thing that we have been writing, the thing that we have been talking about. When Pulse of Africa airs some programs, it's going to be by Africans, so that we have announced and then a well-researched kind of reporting when it comes to the Pulse of Africa. So you would get some authenticity. The second one is you would get some unity. Pulse of Africa will work for the integration, the regional, at the same time continental integration, at the same time for the collaboration of African nation and people as well. And the third one is the main one. It's going to be the impact. So the impact is just challenging the stereotype, which again is the very interest of African people and African nation as well. And the third one is it's going to be an innovative platforms. Now we are living in the digital era. We have to fit ourselves with the evolving platforms. Like the challenge that we have 20 years back may not be the challenge now. So we have a different reality. So Pulse of Africa take into consideration this reality and work for realization of the African development. We have been seeing some positive things. We have also challenge. We tried our best to bring about some solutions to our problems. We also try to recommend, at the same time suggest some sort of ideas for just sustaining or continuing the development of African peoples. We have some progress in the political spectrum as well. Of course, we have a challenge, but we have some sort of achievement. So we, as a Pulse of Africa, because of this platform, because of the discussion, because of the news, the in-depth analysis, such a kind of things like that, I think we would contribute for the better frontier of the African continent in a nutshell.
Before we move on, we have some notifications for our viewers. We'll be back after a short break.
POA, the Pulse of Africa.
The Voice of Africa.
POA, the Voice of Africa.
This is the face and the voice of Africa. We want you to watch this all the time.
Stick with it. You will see Africa, how it will change for the better.
In Africa's journey toward a prosperous future, the African Union's Agenda 2063 envisions a united, integrated continent where borders are not barriers but gateways to opportunity. At the heart of this vision is free movement, a key driver of Africa's economic integration.
The visa-free movement in Africa is a very important dialogue that enables, that encourages the movement of people around the continent for an integrated, peaceful and prosperous Africa.
Visa-free movement has the power to drive Africa's economic growth by deepening integration. With its rich resources, talent and markets, the ability for people to move freely across borders is a game changer.
If we want an integrated Africa, that we must allow Africans move freely within the continent.
POA, Pulse of Africa, the face and voice of Africa.
Moving on to you, how do you address that these ideologies that are rooted in racism and racial superiority need to be addressed in counteracting the false narratives that the Westerners have loaded upon us?
Well, I think the Pan-Africanism plays a big role here. And of course, Pan-Africanism, as we know, is it's a movement advocating for unity, solidarity, self-determination among Africans. And it has to translate, in many aspects. Well, we know that, Africans from different directions, north, south, east, west, and central, need to coordinate, just what they do, okay? So they need to come up together and then, defend their identity, defend their interest, defend their rights, etc. Well, this, of course, involves, for example, promotion of a unified narrative. As an African, what is it that, we share amongst ourselves, okay? An African identity is necessary here. Well, if we take, Agenda 2063, it looks forward to unifying, the African continent. So how do we do that? We, of course, need to work towards, establishing, a shared identity, and Pulse of Africa will play, a peculiar role. Of course, Pulse of Africa cannot do it, by itself. It needs to coordinate with media houses, in other countries, and even, it has to coordinate, what it does with the rest of the world, including, Western countries as well. Okay. I do believe that, Western countries, if they see that, we improve, we change for the good, for the better, it is very likely that, just they work with us. And especially these days, because of technology, because of, new approaches, the world is becoming a small village and you cannot separate yourself from the rest of the world. And that has to start, within, the African continent, which means, African continents need to come together. The other one is counteracting, of course, stereotypes. We've mentioned that, we have a series of stereotypes that started quite long ago, and they need to be, worked against, and Africans, just need to come together and then, counteract, these stereotypes. Of course, collaboration, encouraging Pan-African collaboration is, a very important thing. We can see that cross-border content is very important. For example, you need to fly to Nairobi, South Africa, Morocco, just to have some content, okay, as a journalist. Well, unfortunately, this is not an easy thing to do because it incurs, expenses. And to avoid, being exposed to too much expenses, especially those, unaffordable ones, then there must be a coordination, a collaboration, just between these media houses. So the Pulse of Africa need to collaborate with other media houses in the continent, so that need to find, a way to access, genuine media contents, and amplifying regional voices, just of course the other thing. As we've mentioned earlier, Africa has distinct features in terms of, its culture, politics, etc. So for this, regional voices, okay, need to be amplified. We can say a lot, but I think I stop here.
Yes. So how do you think Pan-Africanism, mentioned by Gamachisa, influences the programming and strategic direction of Pulse of Africa?
Yes. Of course, today we are celebrating the establishment, the creation of a new Pan-African media institution called the Pulse of Africa. And I think it's a great step forward towards advocating the ideals of Pan-Africanism. The idea, the vision of establishing Pan-African media institution, Pulse of Africa, has been in the minds of Dr. Abiy Ahmed, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, during the 35th Ordinary Session of African Union Assembly. Ethiopian Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed has spoken about the necessities and the imperatives of establishing Pan-African media institution, and he said that African voices need to be heard loud and clear. 3 years after he delivered that powerful speech, Ethiopia has been able to inaugurate Pulse of Africa, Pan-African Media Institution. And I think this is an important milestone, an important achievement. So it needs collaboration, it needs cooperation. Pulse of Africa needs to work with other sister media organizations in the continent and outside of the continent, as long as it serves the idea of changing the narratives of Africa, as long as it serves portraying the complete and accurate portrayal of Africa. Deputy Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Temesgen Tirun, has said Ethiopia has showed its unwavering commitment toward African issue. The fact that Ethiopia has never been colonized sparked anti-colonial movement and independence struggle across African countries. And of course, African countries have recognized Ethiopia, and they have chosen Ethiopia to be the headquarter of the continental organization, African Union. So I do understand, like, the Pulse of Africa will be treasures of Africa. So African countries, African media organizations, African civil societies, African influencers need to work with the Pulse of Africa, and needs to put Pulse of Africa in a stage where it can promote the idea and the ideals of Pan-Africanism.
You've both called for cooperation and collaboration among African countries and communities to improve the continent's global image. Barakat, you have highlighted our contents and programs on Pulse of Africa, which are very exciting and will be updated very soon. So to sum up our discussion, how can Pulse of Africa incorporate and promote Pan-African values through the contents you've mentioned and the partnerships we look forward to?
I mean, I have already mentioned about like the programs, but just to add on the Pan-African ideals, as we have already discussed about, the Pan-Africanism it's a social movement, it was started in the early 20th century. It seeks to create a kind of unity, solidarity among Black people in the African continent, in the Caribbean, and then the North Africa as well, because we have, I mean, a common background. I mean, we have a humble background, a difficult past, like if you look at the recent past history of the black people in the world, it is the history of domination. It is the history of subjugation. So that seeks to create a kind of, collaboration to get rid of such kind of domination and such kind of subjugation. And this Pan-Africanism has resulted in, revoking of colonialism in the later years, specifically in the 1960s and the 1970s in the African continent. And then it brought about some new dimensions when it comes to the African history, when it comes to the African political structure in general. So this Pan-Africanism, it's getting some tractions when it comes to in different aspects, specifically in the economic aspect. For Africa to be, a continent that is developed, that has a future for its youth population, there should be some sort of collaboration among African countries. There should be some sort of, working together among African institutions. For example, if you look at, the African Free Trade Area, this is the product of, collaboration among African countries. Of course, it's still in the plan. It has some sort of, implementation, but it seeks some sort of collaboration among African countries. And if you look at, the blueprint of the African Union, which is the Agenda 2063, most of the plans, I would say that all of the plans going to be achieved if there is only collaboration and some sort of, a kind of, unity among African nations. Unless otherwise, it's going to be, a motto on the paper, or it's going to be, left out on the shelf. So collaboration is very important. So by just taking these ideals into consideration, Pulse of Africa will work for the strengthening of collaboration and cooperation among African nations, and that's why it has created different kind of program, as I already mentioned, like the African We Want, the creators, the horse mouse, the notables. And if you look at everything, it try to touch upon, like the reality in different part of the continent, like it try to take into consideration the realities in the 5 regions of Africa. So all of, the programs are actually reflects, the aspiration, the goals of the African people, the African countries, at the same time, the regional organization, which is merely the African Union. So, it would play its role in terms of strengthening collaboration and cooperation among African nations. That's what I would like to say at this point.
Yeah, well, when we talk about Pan-Africanism, as I said earlier, a unified narrative should be established, and Africans need to work on that. And this thing is something, of course, it's not a new thing. Okay, it has always been said by our leaders, earlier leaders. We remember. The problem was that even though African leaders, just came together, Nkrumah, for example, Emperor Haile Selassie, and many others had come together to establish, this Pan-Africanism movement. But the problem was they didn't agree, and when they just, attempted to bring it down to the ground, we had, problems. We had challenges. People, leaders, just went their own separate ways, and eventually the impact of Pan-Africanism in general got diminished, throughout the years. And this time we have to bring it back, but with determination and commitment by leaders. And unless and otherwise, African leaders are really committed to implement the notion of Pan-Africanism in general, especially, using their media such as Pulse of Africa, then what they had intended, what the leaders, earlier leaders had intended, cannot be realized. And this is, something that current African leaders need to consider very well.
Moving on to you.
Pan-Africanism, of course, the umbrella that can bring Africans together. And the idea of Pan-Africanism needs to be revitalized the ideas, the vision of African forefathers, the visions of Julius Nyerere, the visions of Kwame Nkrumah, the visions of Emperor Haile Selassie needs to be revitalized, and Africa needs to work for Pan-Africanism. You know, Africa needs to have collective voice. Africa needs to struggle for independence. So physically, colonizers are out of the soil of Africa. Still, the ideas and the perception of Westerners, the narratives of the West is with us today. So we need to work, and the best tool to fight against those narratives, that wrong narrative, is of course media. You know, through media we can change lots of things, and of course it is through media that we get the current perception of Africa. It is through media, isn't it? We have not traveled to North Africa or West Africa or South Africa or even East Africa. You know, we have got the idea of Africa, the perception of Africa, the understanding of Africa because of the media. And it is through the media that we can change the narratives of Africa. And African leaders, African politicians, African scholars, African writers, African people of art, people of literature, and any Africans need to work together to bring about a collective, a unified voice in Africa. Look, Africa does not have a single seat in the United Nations Security Council, a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. Why? That's because Africa is portrayed as insignificant. African countries are portrayed, represented as countries that do not settle their disputes, that do not settle their differences, that do not overcome and solve their own problems. So Africans are regarded, considered as insignificant. Therefore, the assumption of the outside world is that Africa cannot significantly contribute for the world peace, for the world security. And that is the result of narrative. And we need to be very much conscious and careful about the narrative. And we need to, revise the narratives that we have developed so far. And we need to chart a new chapter towards a new narrative for Africa. Yes, Africans, we can. And today we have established Pulse of Africa, Pan-Africa Media Institution, and we, children of Africa, need to embrace the movement. And the narratives of Africa shouldn't be created and shaped by non-Africans. In fact, the narratives of Africa should flow from the pens of African children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The key takeaways from your conclusions are we need to build a developed continent, to not just let it be a motto on paper, to restore Pan-Africanism and revitalize the visions that were laid by our previous fathers and leaders. So stories should, yes, be told by Africans. Your ideas have been significantly vital. Thank you for joining me on this episode. We've had a very fruitful discussion on POA's inauguration. Stay tuned for more.
Let us all unite and celebrate together the victories won for our liberation. Let us dedicate ourselves to rise together to defend our liberty and unity. All sons and daughters of Africa, flesh of the sun and flesh of the sky, let us make Africa the tree of life. Let us all unite and sing together to uphold the bonds that frame our destiny. Let us dedicate ourselves to fight together for lasting peace and justice on the earth. All sons and daughters of Africa, flesh of the sun and flesh of the sky, let us make Africa the tree of life. Let us all unite and toil together to give the best we have to Africa. The Africa, flesh of the sun and flesh of the sky. Let us make Africa the tree of life.